Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss how the Tory government are seeking to use their own ULEZ scheme to attack Labour as we get ready for the unofficial general election campaign to begin, and what their realistic chances of doing so are. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel. So I've already discussed enough times how, although Labour's Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, is fully behind improving the air quality in London through schemes like ULEZ, it is actually a Conservative scheme. They started it. They even pushed the expansion into Greater London, which goes live today. And never mind that now. Labour failed to make this point during the pivotal by-election in Uxbridge and South Ruislip, and so Labour have chosen to adjust and defend the policy instead. Perhaps they even feel that, properly presented, the policy is popular enough that Labour don't mind taking the credit if the Tories want to be ranged against it. The Conservatives successfully retained their Uxbridge seat by focusing resistance to ULEZ. They now think it will be a good wedge issue for not only next year's mayoral elections, but more importantly, the general election. But are they right? I've said before that as soon as ULEZ is rolled out, those who voted Conservative in the by-election will realise that actually it's not costing them anything, because over 90% of cars in London are ULEZ compliant. And since that by-election, Khan has also rolled out the scrappage scheme to cover basically everyone who needs it. And there was a previous video I was doing this, and I saw a comment from someone saying, well, no, that's not very good if you can't afford a new car. Easy mistake to make, because there has been a previous scrappage scheme which was designed to boost the sale of new cars. You know, so you had to, you only got your scrappage bonus if you bought a new car. But the ULEZ scrappage scheme is purely for scrapping a non-compliant vehicle and getting a compliant one. In fact, you know, Transport for London even pushed the idea of you can get second-hand cars for this much and this much. So it doesn't have to be new at all. Also appears classic cars are exempt. So that's not really an argument. So it's really this simple. If anyone has a non-compliant car in London, there's money available to scrap it and get a compliant car. And that compliant car will be better because it'll be newer. The only people having any genuine cause for complaint are independent trades workers with vans. Because the scrappage scheme here, it does exist, but it's not generous enough to realistically get a compliant van in many cases. However, even here, the Mayor's office have been reminding people that you get tax relief on congestion charges if you are incurring them for business. So if you're driving into one of these zones, or basically anywhere around London, with a non-compliant van, but you're a tradesperson, you're like a plasterer or something, so you're doing it for business, you can claim the money back through your tax return. Now, tax relief doesn't always mean you claim all of it back, but I saw a report in the Financial Times suggesting that that is the case. And you know, they're not exactly motivated to back Khan for no reason. So the actual number of people who will fall foul of this ULEZ charge will not only be really small, and should be too small to swing any seats in London in the general election, but will gain way more than they lose by jettisoning this Tory government. Because I've said this before, the downside to the ULEZ charge is it's a regressive tax effectively. It affects those who are poorer when it affects them at all. And they're not the sort of people that benefit from keeping the Tories in office. So at this point, it would look like ULEZ as a wedge issue is a complete dead duck. However, the Conservatives must have known all this as well and must have discussed it, and they still think it's a suitable long-term plan. So is there anything about it, even now that it's gone live, and it won't take long for those affected to realise it doesn't actually affect them at all, could it still be a wedge issue for the Tories? Well, possibly. There are a couple of things that spring to mind. But first, I will point out that under normal circumstances, I would give the Tories the benefit of the doubt that they've done the homework. I'd be thinking, right, well, I can't see where they're going with this, but they must be going somewhere because, you know, like I regularly point out when gauging public reaction to policies, I only have access to the same polling you do. It's very general polling that's published. Sometimes there's a bit of a breakdown by types of voter and region, but it's not. It's too clumsy for me to draw firm conclusions. Like political parties, they commission polling which identifies and targets key voters very precisely. So they will always know the strengths and weaknesses of a policy better than I ever could. You know, when you see commentators in the media waxing lyrical about this policy or that policy, they're always basing it on empirical thinking. But it's just as much of a con as any Tory grift. They're just saying what their followers want to hear and coming up with what sounds to those followers like plausible reason. I look at outcomes. For example, some of Labour's policies seem dubious. But although it is possible, in fact probable, that some of them are not rational, I absolutely think that they're adopting some positions irrationally. It's obvious that the vast majority are carefully targeted. How do we know? They've maintained a sizable poll lead for basically a year now. As I've said a couple of times in the last week, that poll gap has remained static for the whole of 2023 at about 20 points. There is absolutely zero evidence that Sunak is able to make any headway. So I give Labour a large slice of benefit of doubt because of the results. Similarly, although in theory the Conservatives should also be polling very carefully when forming policies, I do not give them the benefit of the doubt. And I'll tell you why. In fact, I'll give you two reasons. The first is the obvious one. It's the counter to the Labour one. Sunak has not moved the dial at all on his party's poll rating in 2023. It varies by a point either way, and that's it. It just goes up a point, down a point, down a point, up a point, down a point. You know, he's got the same access to targeted polling that Labour do, but he's clearly not using it as expertly because the results are shocking. Second, there is evidence that Sunak forms policies without considering what voters want first, without considering that careful polling. So, in fact, jumping on the ULEZ bandwagon was one such case. As soon as they retained that Uxbridge seat, even though their majority had been brought right down to 500, immediately announced a tactic of using what he termed anti-motorist schemes as a wedge issue against Labour. But there wasn't enough time to have tested this tactic out using polling and focus groups. Even if in the few weeks before that by-election result they'd been doing it, it wasn't enough time. So the combination of these two things means that I give the Tories no benefit of the doubt at all. I will judge it purely on results. I mean, consider that Sunak has been pushing ULEZ and similar schemes for like a month and a half now. Really been pushing them. Still hasn't improved his party's poll rating in terms of either vote share or MRP seat distribution. There is every chance that Sunak has just made a reactionary leap to a platform based on the fact it can unite a lot of his MPs. A lot of MPs and party members can get behind this idea of, oh yeah, we should be attacking the motorist. And with no thought given to whether voters will be swayed, and if so, if enough in target seats will be swayed. But it is still worth considering if the Tories have any hopes at all by persisting with this. So one thought that occurs to me is that my hypothesis that Londoners will start to see that it doesn't affect them at all over the next week or two won't work around the countries. Because the Tories are trying to use ULEZ they're not just trying to use it to retain a few seats in London. They're trying to use it to drive a larger issue around the country. And voters outside London will never realise that the charges don't actually apply to them if they never drive in London. Unless, of course, the media point it out to them, oh, actually, no one's really paying this charge. But if the media didn't bother to do this up to now, why would they in the future? So the Tories could still claim that Labour want to charge motorists more and restrict their access to town and city centres. The fact that Labour made a fairly unedifying pivot on ULEZ in the wake of Uxbridge, creating what I thought was an unnecessary friction with the Mayor's efforts, suggests that Labour strategists accept that the Tories may have a credible tactic in some parts of the country. I just struggle to see how it will work in London now. The Tories' attacks were always the sort of thing which work hypothetically. It might be different if ULEZ were designed to be rolled out after the elections, but they're active right now in all parts of London. If it had been rolled out before the Uxbridge by-election, I think Labour would have won it. But they do remain hypothetical outside London, don't they? Because this ULEZ day doesn't affect anyone outside of London. We also know that the Tories are pushing an actual hypothetical policy. They're claiming that London plan to introduce a pay-per-mile charge around cities and things. Now, not only is this not a Labour policy or a Transport for London policy, as it happens, but both the Mayor of London and the National Labour Party have said so. Still, the Tories have a habit of making up Labour policies to scare voters with. It's maybe why they never have time to work on policies for themselves. But these are what I see as the dangers, if any, actually exist for Labour. Not the policies themselves once implemented, because then people see, oh, it doesn't actually affect us, or it actually works quite well. But the perception of those policies while they remain hypothetical. I cannot see how ULEZ becomes much of a wedge issue in London itself next year. Once the rollout has been bedded in. It's active now, it's active today. Come the mayoral elections, like it's nearly a year away, sorry. It's all bedded in. Khan has already been working hard to counter a lot of the arguments against it. He can further refine it ahead of his own election campaign next May. But it could, in theory, remain useful against voters outside London, as can try to convince voters of secret Labour policies which don't actually exist. But like I said, this doesn't mean the Tories really do have a viable tactic here. I just think Sunak has a habit of jumping on whatever issue he thinks unites his MPs, rather than what voters want. Because he's missed so many times before when leaping for bandwagons that I will need a lot of convincing that he's really got anything to grab hold of here. It really does seem to be the case with Sunak that when he's deciding to get behind a policy, it's his primary motivation is, what can I do to stop infighting within my parliamentary party? What can I get the bulk of my MPs around, whether they're sort of more moderate One Nation Tories or the sort of ERG Tories? What issues can they all get behind? And he worries about how to use them to appeal to voters later, which is the wrong way around, really. Still, they're going for it, so we'll see how public attitudes change, if at all, in the polling that we do see published. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.